Welcome back students. Now let's discuss about quinolones. Already we have discussed sulfonamides, quatermoxazole and all, and now let's discuss about quinolones. What are quinolones? Quinolones are synthetic antimicrobials. They have quinolone structure and are mainly active against gram-negative bacteria. Okay. What are quinolones? Quinolones are synthetic antimicrobials. They have quinolone structure and are mainly active against the gram-negative bacteria. Whereas the fluorinated compounds are active against the gram positive also. Under quinolones, the first member is the nalidixic acid, and this nalidixic acid is mainly effective against the urinary tract infection, GI infection, but its activity is very limited because of its low potency. It will be reaching modest tissue and blood levels. It is having a restricted spectrum of activity, and there are more chance of developing bacterial resistance. So its usefulness is limited. Why? It is useful only in GI and urinary infections, and also it has low potency. It has modest blood and tissue levels. It is having restricted spectrum of activity, and there are chances of bacterial resistance. Now you can see the structure of quinolone. The first one is the nalidixic acid, and whereas the fluorinated one is the ciprofloxacin. Ciprofloxacin is formed by fluorination at the 6th position, and also there is a addition of a piperazine ring at the 7th position leads to development of ciprofloxacin. Okay, and this was done in the year 1980s. In 1980s, a fluorination was done at the 6th position, and also an piperazine ring was introduced at the 7th position. They have developed the fluoroquinolones. Fluoroquinolones have a high potency. They have an extended spectrum. The development of resistance is less. They can penetrate into the tissue in a good manner, and also they are better tolerable. And the first drug is nalidixic acid. And if you see this nalidixic acid, it is effective against the gram-negative bacteria, mainly E. coli, Proteus, Klebsiella, Enterobacter, Shigella, and not Pseudomonas. It is effective against gram-negative bacteria. Okay, and how it acts is it acts by inhibiting bacterial DNA gyrase. What's the mechanism? Mechanism is act by inhibiting bacterial DNA gyrase, and the resistance develop rapidly. It has adverse effects like GI upset, rashes, and the main adverse effects faced with nalidixic acid is neurological like headache, drowsiness, vertigo, visual disturbances, seizures. Seizures occurs mainly in children. So after the neurological adverse effects, the neurological adverse effects are headache, drowsiness, vertigo, visual disturbances and seizures, and individuals with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency will be developing hemolysis, and because of this nalidixic acid is contraindicated in infants. Next comes our fluoroquinolones, and fluoroquinolones already we have studied. Fluorination at the 6th position leads to development of fluoroquinolones, and in 1980s there is a single substitution, and but in 1990s so many additional substitution have been done, and they are effective against gram positive bacteria and anaerobes also, and they have a longer metabolic stability, and we are calling it as the second generation fluoroquinolones. The fluoroquinolones we can classify as first generation drugs and second generation drugs. The first generation drugs are norfloxacin, ciprofloxacin, ofloxacin and perfloxacin, whereas the second generation drugs are levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, gemifloxacin, prolifloxacin, lomifloxacin and sparfloxacin. Now coming to the mechanism of action of fluoroquinolones. How fluoroquinolones act? Fluoroquinolones act by inhibiting bacterial DNA gyrase. What's the mechanism of action of fluoroquinolones? Fluoroquinolones acts by inhibiting the bacterial DNA gyrase. What's the role of DNA gyrase? The DNA gyrase will be nicking the double-stranded DNA. It will be introducing negative supercoils and then reseals the nictins. Hope you're clear. What's the role of DNA gyrase? DNA gyrase will be nicking. Nicking means it will be cut the double-stranded DNA. it introduces negative supercoils and then reseals the nictins. And what's the purpose of this introducing negative supercoiling is to prevent excessive positive supercoiling of the strands when the DNA strands separate to permit replication or transcription. So what's the purpose of introducing the negative supercoil? The purpose of introducing negative supercoil is to prevent the excessive positive supercoiling of the strand when they separate to permit replication or transcription. And if you see this DNA gyrase enzyme, it has 2A subunit and 2B subunit. How many subunits this DNA gyrase has? It has 2A subunits and 2B subunits. The A subunit will be carrying out the nicking function. B subunit introduce negative supercoil and A subunit again reseal the nictins. So what's the role of DNA gyrase? DNA gyrase will be cutting the double-stranded DNA, introduces negative supercoil and then reseal the nictins. This is necessary to prevent the excess positive supercoiling of the strands when they separate to permit transcription or replication. And if you see DNA gyrase, it has 2A subunit and 2B subunit. A subunit will be cutting, carry out the nicking function. B subunit will be introducing the negative supercoil and then A subunit will be resealing the nictins. And our drug fluoroquinolones will be binding to the A subunit and it will be inhibiting the nicking and resealing function. What our drug will be doing? It will be binding to the A subunit and it will be inhibiting the nicking and resealing function. And in case of gram-positive bacteria, the target of action is topoisomerase 4 and this topoisomerase 4 will be nicking and separate the DNA strands for DNA replication. If it is the gram-positive bacteria, the target of fluoroquinolones will be topoisomerase 4 which nicks and separate the DNA strands for replication. Finally, the bactericidal action occurs by digestion of DNA by exonucleases. Okay. Finally, there will be digestion of the DNA by exonucleases whose production is signaled by damaged DNA. So actually, since the introduction of negative supercoiling, everything is inhibited, there will be production of damaged DNA. So there will be a signal from the damaged DNA. So the DNA will be digested by exonucleases and finally bactericidal action occurs. Finally, the fluoroquinolones will be producing bactericidal action by the exonucleases which digest the damaged DNA from which it will get the signal. That is the mechanism of action of fluoroquinolone. So we had an introductory part, discuss the introduction of quinolones. Quinolones have a quinolone ring. They are synthetic antimicrobials and the first quinolone is analytic acid which is primarily active against gram-negative bacteria. Next comes the fluorinated one. Fluorinated is effective against the gram-positive also, and we have studied the mechanism of action of fluoroquinolones. It acts by inhibiting DNA gyrase enzyme. DNA gyrase enzyme is the enzyme which nicks the double-stranded DNA, introduces negative supercoils and reseal the nictins. So, it's the purpose of introducing negative supercoil is to prevent the excess positive supercoiling of strands when they separate for replication or transcription. And the DNA gyrase consists of 2 subunits, 2A subunit and 2B subunit. A subunit carry out the cutting function, B subunit introduce the negative supercoil and A subunit reseal the nictins. So the fluoroquinolones will bind to A subunit and interfere with the cutting and resealing function. In gram-positive bacteria, target of action is topoisomerase 4 which nicks and separate the dotted DNA for DNA replication. Finally, bactericidal action occurs due to digestion of DNA by exonuclease whose production is signaled by the damaged DNA. Okay, thank you.